Mr. Azam has the highest certifications from CloudPro, expert in network infrastructure design and deployment, and expert in data center design and deployment. Mr. Azam is responsible for leading and growing the advanced technology services consulting business in Florida. He also supports a highly skilled IT consulting engineers, project managers, and sales teams who are enabling CDW clients to achieve their goals by leveraging IT in the most meaningful ways.
Thank you, Mr. Zam, for accepting our invitation to talk about cloud computing. Would you like to add anything on before we start?
Sure. Thank you guys for hosting this interview. I'm looking forward to it. I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Thank you. So, in your own words, what is cloud computing?
Well, computing can be a lot of different things, but in the simplest form, cloud computing is ability to access network and computing and storage resources in a data center that is in a remote location. So apart from where we are today, cloud computing is a data center that is in somewhere else, let's say, Miami or across the street or in California or across the world, and you're able to access that content on your phone or on your device across the internet.
Please tell us about the kind of projects you work on and how cloud computing is part of them.
Yeah, so my organization lead cloud computing projects on a regular basis where we help customers design and deploy data centers in their facilities in a lot of cases that their customers or their end users access that allows for mobility from anywhere. They're able to access that content, whether it's a website, whether it's an app on your phone, or maybe even medical records that a doctor can access in their iPad in front of a patient, but the actual content is in a data center somewhere else. In addition to that, there are large cloud solutions providers out there such as Amazon or Azure, right? That's their business. They provide cloud computing solutions for large customers. My organization helps customers deploy those solutions as well, in addition to building cloud data center from scratch.
Could you give us an example of one of those projects?
Sure. There are a couple come to mind. There was one that I was personally involved in building out for a healthcare customer in Atlanta, where the customer is based out of Florida, but their data center is in Atlanta. And it was for medical records. They wanted to be able to provide all of the medical records to their patients and to their doctors across the country, right? You can't just have all of your data in the single building, right? You need to be able to provide access to that across the country to their patients as well as to their doctors. And we built out a network that consisted of routers and switches. We built out a network that consisted of multiple service providers coming into that data center. So if service provider A goes down, they have service provider B that can take over. We also built out a huge array of disks or storage, huge storage arrays that kept all that content there for the customer. It was in a resilient form, which means that if one disk array failed, it was automatically copying data over to the secondary, so there was no single point of failure. We also built out a bunch of servers. We use Cisco UCS, Unified Computing System, which is basically a bunch of servers that is set up in a high available environment. So if one server fails, another server automatically takes over. So all of those pieces work together as a platform for our customers to be able to provide medical records, patient records for our customer.
So you're talking about how you provide solutions for other people, but how do you use cloud computing in your work?
In the industry, there's a term called, eating your own dog food. We eat our own dog food in the sense that we also not only do we build cloud solutions, we also use cloud solutions ourselves. Something as simple as you guys are probably familiar with, which I think is pretty cool, is Microsoft Office 365, right? So that's email in the cloud, that's OneDrive in the cloud, that's SharePoint where you build out a site, right? All of those tools we use as well, and I use it on a regular basis where I'm able to share content with my coworkers, with my customers, able to access emails and spreadsheets that are important to my business. Also, there are things like Dropbox and and Box.com that we leverage as well quite frequently.
So now we have all these cool things like emailing and stuff like that. But how did cloud computing start off? Like, how has it evolved over time?
So initially, networks were a single computer, right? Sometimes those single computers, I mean, it depends on how far back you go. You can go as far back as the 60s and 70s and 80s, where you had these big entire room full of computers. Like the computer took up the entire room. Size of this entire room was a single computer. And they were using it to, do calculations. And obviously we went from that to our mini device. This device has more power than, I don't know, a billion mainframe computers, like literally billions amount of power in this device than we did back then. What drove cloud computing is mobility, right? What does that mean? That means the ability to be mobile. Users no longer wanted to be tied down to their desk to access their content. That was one thing. The other thing that drove cloud computing is high availability. If this building catches on fire, I don't want all my eggs in one basket. I need to make sure I am redundant. So there's geographic redundancy in my data. So those two things, along with a couple of other things, but those are two main in my mind that drove cloud computing, where you're able to access your data from any device. So that's key, being able to access from any device, from anywhere, and at any time. That's what cloud computing really enables you to do.
I know there are a lot of challenges in cloud computing, but what do you think are the biggest ones in education, business, and personal use?
Yeah, good question. There are a lot of challenges. Cloud computing is simple in some degrees. It's easy, right? It's easy to just sign up a cloud computing account and start doing cloud-related things where you have your content somewhere else. That's the first thing. You have your content somewhere else, and a lot of times that content is owned by somebody else. For example, Microsoft or Google or Facebook, or potentially even CDW, right? You don't always have control over what's happening with your data and where it is. So that's a concern to some businesses, particularly if you think about healthcare and government regulations. There are some government regulation that says my data cannot be offshore. So that's one of the concerns that some of my customers have is, I don't want to store this content in the cloud and then it's somewhere in China or some other place. I want to know exactly where it's going to be. So it's working with customers and narrowing down where their data is going to live. The other part that is concerning to some customers or challenges is the privacy of that data. Yes, I'm putting my content up in the cloud. Who else has access to it, right? It may not be just me. So that's the other concern, is the privacy aspect. So the regulatory concern as well as the privacy concern that people have when it comes to cloud storage.
You talked about other people having access to your information and like other people being responsible for your information. How does that tie into liabilities? Like if something happens to the data, who's responsible for it?
Well, in most cases, you have to read the terms and conditions of the agreement that you have with your cloud service provider. Something as simple as an app that you guys are downloading and you're playing a game on. Some games are very immersive that has your personal content. Something as simple as your name, your location, because some of those apps track your location. So in those cases, who's responsible for that data? I mean, you're providing your location information to those games, for example. I mean, that's a game that's in the cloud. It's not on your phone. You may download the app, but that's just a GUI, right? Graphical user interface. But your actual content could be in the cloud, including the game itself. But they have access to all that information. So your question is, what are some of the liabilities, right? You have to look at the contract. In most cases, as a general rule, the liability is on you to protect your data. Yes, you can go after them in legal suits and stuff, but cloud providers do a really good job of protecting themselves in basically, they basically say they can do anything with your information, and most people don't read the terms and conditions or the acceptable usage policies. So you gotta look at that. I would say a lot of times, you're basically, when you do cloud computing, you are giving up some of your rights. And you have to know what's acceptable to you to find the right cloud provider based on the terms and conditions. So all the fine print, you wanna read those if you have concerns around liability.
So we use cloud computing all the time in daily life, but what do you think would happen if we lost it? For like a few hours or a month or forever?
A lot of people go crazy if you lost access to cloud computing, because we've become so accustomed to data and access to our content very quickly. So Apple uses, for example, iCloud, where people back up their phones or people put their pictures and their videos, right? If I lost access to that and access to my personal content, I would be pretty upset. And I think people have different dependencies on cloud, but there's also businesses that rely beyond the personal impact. A large portion of our world run on cloud computing. For example, Netflix. Netflix leverages multiple data centers around the world, and they actually use Amazon's data center as part of their Amazon Web Services. It's a cloud solution. So if Amazon went down for whatever reason, a lot of Netflix customers and many other customers that rely on Amazon would be down. So from the point of view of Netflix, their business is impacted in a huge way. Their customers are impacted in a huge way. But sometimes it could even be life and death, depending on what the importance of that information is. For example, if it's a medical organization that needs to look at patient records that are stored in the cloud, you show up to the ER and they're trying to pull that content, they're trying to get your medical record, they're trying to figure out your medicine interactions, right? What are some of the medicines you're allowed or not allowed to take, right? If that record is in the cloud and they're not able to access it, it could be a matter of life and death, right? So impacts could be personal, could be financial, could be health related as well.
A lot of people are concerned about how secure the cloud is. Do you think that the cloud is safe?
Relatively speaking, I think the cloud is safe because the need to have access to your information from anywhere, when you have that need, even if it's your personal content that you have at home, there is some exposure from a security standpoint. There is some risk, even if you own the data yourself, right? So you're now trusting Amazon or Microsoft or Facebook to look after your data. You're never going to have 100% security, no matter what. Even in your home, you could put 10 locks on it. Nobody can guarantee 100% that somebody can't break through. Same scenarios exist with cloud computing. So what you need to do is when you select a cloud partner, you need to understand what does your cloud provider do to accommodate security concerns. And if you do that, I think you'll be in good shape. At least you make an informed decision, right? You're never going to have 100% security, but at least you pick the one that is the most secure.
You said consider what they do. Do you think it's what they do is safer than keeping it on your hard drive or something and protecting it with passwords? Because if your data does get lost and it goes out on the internet, like people notice Google failed to keep people's data safe. Google goes down, so it's bad for Google. So do you think that they try hard enough to keep your data safe that it's worth it for safety reasons to keep it in the cloud rather than in a hard drive, or is keeping it safe local still more safe?
Okay. A good question. That decision that you have is something that businesses balance all the time, and individuals potentially balance all the time. But individuals are a little bit more laxed with their information in the cloud, but businesses are a lot more interested in that security. So as a business, you have your own data center, right? That sometimes are millions of dollars, and in some cases billions of dollars invested in your data center. So you've got to invest a lot of security resources and technologies to maintain the data center that a business owns, right? So it's a decision that they have to make to say, okay, I can secure my data better than Google and Amazon. Sometimes the answer to that is maybe a yes. Other times it's a no, because Amazon and Google and some of the other larger cloud providers, that's their business. So if I'm a healthcare company, my business isn't security, right? My business is healthcare. My business is in IT, right? That may not be what I'm really good at, but I'm trying to be good at it. I'm trying to pull in some experts, but I may not get as good as Amazon and Google. So even with some of the headlines in the news, I think you have just as good a chance of securing your environment in the cloud or yourself. It just depends on, the question I ask my customers all the time is, how much security can you afford not to have? Because it's a balance. You can put 50 locks on your door in your house, or you can put 1 or 2. What is it that you have in your house that you're worried about somebody stealing? How important is that, right? So there is no perfect answer, but you've got to evaluate how much security you can afford or not afford.
How do you think our daily lives changed when we started using the cloud? Like, how do you think it was before, and how do you think it changed due to like people starting to adopt the cloud?
That's a good question. I remember in my days, I mean, you guys have been using cloud even when you were born at 1 year old or 2 years old. The idea back in the day is if I wanted to save something, I had to carry around a disk. And then I had to take that disk, put it in the computer, let it save, and then put that disk away. And when I needed to access that content again, I had to pull that disk out again. So it's a single place my information is, and if I'm not home, I cannot access that information. So something as simple as being able to access my pictures or my financial records from anywhere, or log into my bank account and see how much money I have. I don't have to drive to the bank. Like back in the day, that's what you had to do. Maybe even make a phone call, but I think it made life easier. It made life to some people more entertaining because you have access to all of your content. It created new business opportunities because of cloud for a lot of companies, right? There are a lot of companies that exist today just because cloud exists. If the concept of cloud didn't exist, a lot of companies that wouldn't be available. Like, it comes down to the information, right? That's the line of business that we are in, is helping customers have ways to communicate, and cloud allows us to communicate more effectively.
If I were a business, how could I save by using the cloud? Because you're paying someone else to save your stuff. Is it worth it to pay someone else rather than do it yourself?
Yeah, very good question. This is something we evaluate for customers all the time. If you're a business, does cloud make sense for you? We look at, depending on your business, let's say you're a medium-sized business, right? That means different things to different people. From my perspective, a medium-sized business is really 100 users or more, right? And that's a sizable company. And what you have to look at is not putting all your eggs in one basket. Some customers, they rely on cloud as a DR solution, which is disaster recovery. They still maintain all of their functions like they always do, their network, their data center, their computers, their storage, right, all their applications as a primary location. But they don't have the money to have a DR, right, a disaster recovery location, because then they have to build a new data center, and in some cases they may have to be someplace else. Because if they have a data center in Florida and there's a hurricane, then they're risking their business. So instead of having their secondary data center that's built out somewhere else, they can save money by going to the cloud. They can still maintain their network, but have a cloud solution that allows them to fail over some of their critical business components into the cloud. And that helps them save money because they're only paying for services that they use, because it's DR, it's not needed all the time. So that's an example. So that's called a hybrid solution, where you have some on-prem and you have some in the cloud. Some customers have 100% cloud. I say actually, there's very few customers that have 100% cloud. There really is no such thing as 100% cloud. It's more like they have majority of their stuff in the cloud, but they always have some stuff that are on-prem, right? On premise. So in that instance, how do you save money? You save money by not having to maintain a location, not having to pay the, cooling and power. You save money by not having to have the resources, network engineers, network programmers, and those guys are very expensive, right? They make a decent amount of money, and as an organization, you have to pay those people. Sometimes they may not have something to do, and other times, even if they have something to do, you still have to pay them. So I think it's important for every business to evaluate their cost and budget scenario to figure out if it makes sense for them. We usually do an analysis. How much do you spend on your hardware today? How much do you spend on your software? How much do you spend on your service provider? So it's doing a cost, it's called a cost benefit analysis, a CBA. When you do a CBA, you can figure out if cloud is going to save you money. Sometimes it's hard to figure out if you're actually going to save money, but you look at the residual benefits, which is maybe I avert a business outage as a result of hurricane. As a result, I sustain my business. It may be one for one, but because I have the cloud, I may not be impacted by natural causes.
You talked a little bit about hybrid cloud. How do you think different people should use the cloud? Do you think they should rely more on the cloud or more on themselves? Like, what do you think is the perfect balance between cloud and on-premise?
It depends on the business. A lot of things in IT is, there's a joke, no matter what the question is, it depends. and I hate to say the same thing to you guys. When you have so many pieces, like a puzzle, right? Every puzzle for every person is different, and their demands and their needs is different. So you have to look at that. You have to evaluate what's important to them. But to give you a simple answer, in most cases, a lot of customers are still, as prevalent as cloud is, there's still a lot of customers, all their stuff is on-prem. So I look at those customers that are 100% on-prem is maybe offloading some of the least critical stuff into the cloud and start looking at migrating and learning, because cloud is also a learning challenge, and you have to have customers that understand it. Start migrating the least critical stuff into the cloud so you can learn how it works better, so you can start leveraging it and seeing what benefits it has to offer.
What do you think virtualization is in terms of computing, and what are the pros and cons of using virtualization?
Oh yeah, virtualization is a great concept. Virtualization, it gives you the ability to maximize the usage of resources on a server. So virtualization back in the early 90s, everybody had a server for everything. So you want to run an email server, you had a server for that. You want to run a database server, you had a server for that. You had a server for everything. So a business may have had 100 applications. Well, guess what? They had 100 servers. What they have found over time, even though you have 100 servers, you're only using about 10 to 20% of the resources, the hardware resources on each server. So across the board, you're wasting 80% of the resources. What if you could take those 100 servers and shrink them down to one and run all the applications in one server? So now you're saving a lot of money, you're saving a lot of space. So that's what virtualization allows you to do, is it allows you to use your hardware so that you can have multiple operating systems, multiple applications running on less hardware. It's not always a single server, but instead of having 100 servers, maybe it's 50 now, right? Because you can now pack in more applications that use 70 to 80% of the resources versus only 10 or 20.
If someone wants to learn more about cloud computing, would they simply just search it up on Google or Bing, or are there any specific websites that you know that are accurate?
I would say Google is your friend. If if you want to learn more about cloud computing, I would say Google is your friend. Look at Google. There's also, if you're looking vendor specific, you can always look at, at Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services. But you also have organizations such as CDW that can provide additional information around cloud.
Thank you for your time. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
You're welcome. I would say be a sponge, keep learning. Thank you guys.
Thank you.